Just before sunrise, on a quiet stretch of Japan's coast, a woman in her 70s pulls on a full wetsuit, walks down a stone path to the water, and steps into the sea without a single piece of breathing equipment. No tank, no regulator, no mask connected to anything but her own held breath. She'll dive like this dozens of times before the morning is over, disappearing beneath the surface, working quickly along the rocks below, and returning to the air only when her lungs demand it. Then she'll do it again and again, the way she has for most of her adult life. In a country famous for robots, bullet trains, and some of the most advanced technology on Earth, this woman is doing something almost nobody else in the world still does professionally. She's diving the same way people here have for roughly 2,000 years. She's called an ama, and what she's doing isn't a performance, and it isn't a tourist attraction, although a few curious visitors do occasionally watch from a distance. It's simply her job, one she's done for decades, one that very few people are left to continue after her. To understand why that matters, you first have to understand exactly how unusual this profession is, even within Japan itself. Ama divers harvest abalone, sea urchin, and other shellfish from the ocean floor by hand, diving without oxygen tanks entirely by choice. This isn't a limitation they've never overcome. It's a defining feature of the practice itself, tied to centuries of local tradition around how these waters should be fished, sustainably, one held breath at a time, rather than with the kind of large-scale harvesting modern equipment would make possible.
The role has been overwhelmingly filled by women for generations, likely for a combination of reasons researchers still debate, including possible physiological advantages in cold water insulation and breath-holding endurance, alongside social and economic patterns specific to these coastal communities. Whatever the original reasons, the result today is unmistakable. This is quite literally women's work, in the most demanding physical sense of that phrase. Picture the rhythm of an ama's working day, and it starts to feel less like a spectacle and more like an extraordinarily disciplined routine. Before diving, many ama gather at a small wooden hut near the shore, called an amagoya, where a fire burns at the center of the room. It's part changing room, part rest stop, part community center, a space where divers warm themselves between dives, share food, and talk with women who understand exactly what the morning's work demands of a person's body. Then, into the water, dive after dive, surfacing with a sharp, distinctive exhale some describe as almost a whistle, before pulling in another breath and going back down. Constant repetition, constant cold, constant physical strain, for hours at a stretch, often well into a diver's 60s, 70s, or even 80s. It's worth pausing on that detail specifically because it's easy to read past it without absorbing what it actually means. Women in their 70s and 80s performing physically demanding, cold water free diving work, professionally, not as some symbolic gesture, but because the abalone and sea urchin they harvest are genuinely part of their livelihood. For much of the 20th century, this same profession found itself connected to one of Japan's most famous modern industries.
Ama divers played a significant role in the country's cultured pearl industry, diving to tend oyster beds in operations that helped make Japanese pearls internationally famous. That fame came with a complicated side effect. International attention sometimes framed ama divers less as skilled professionals and more as an exotic curiosity, a way of presenting Japan to the outside world that focused on appearance rather than the genuine expertise and physical discipline the work actually required. That historical framing deserves to be named honestly and then set firmly aside, because it never captured what this profession actually is. What it actually is, at its core, is one of the most physically demanding traditional occupations still practiced anywhere in the world, carried out today almost entirely by women old enough, in most other professions, to have been retired for decades. And that raises the question sitting quietly underneath this entire story. If it's this demanding, and these women are getting older every year, who exactly is going to continue doing this once they can't anymore? The honest answer, right now, is almost nobody. Younger generations in these coastal communities largely chose different paths, drawn toward cities, toward different careers, toward work that didn't demand this level of physical strain for this level of income. It's an entirely understandable choice, repeated by family after family, that has left the profession without much of a pipeline behind it. Some adult children of amadivers have grown up watching their mothers and grandmothers do this work their entire lives and chosen deliberately not to continue it themselves. That's not framed here as a failure of tradition.
It's simply what tends to happen when a physically brutal profession competes against easier, better-paying alternatives, generation after generation, until very few people are left choosing the harder path. So the number of active amadivers has been shrinking for decades, and the divers who remain are, on average, considerably older than the generations who did this work before them. That leaves a genuinely open question hanging over this entire tradition, one that doesn't have a clean answer yet. What happens to a 2,000-year-old practice when the people who know how to do it are quite literally running out of time to teach it to anyone else? Some communities are trying to answer that question before it becomes irreversible. Museums dedicated to Ama history and culture have begun documenting the practice more deliberately, recording techniques, stories, and the specific local knowledge that's typically passed down informally, diver to diver, rather than written anywhere. Local tourism initiatives now sometimes offer visitors a chance to meet active or retired Ama, share a meal cooked over the amagoya fire, and hear directly from women who've spent their entire working lives in this water. None of these efforts guarantee the tradition survives in its current form, but they represent a genuine attempt to make sure that if the number of divers continues shrinking, at least the knowledge, the stories, and the memory of exactly what these women accomplished doesn't disappear along with them. There's something worth sitting with in the image this documentary opened on.
A woman in her 70s, alone in cold water at sunrise, diving without a single piece of modern breathing equipment, doing physically demanding work that most people a third her age would struggle to complete even once. She isn't doing this because there's no other option. She's doing it because it's what she knows, what she spent her entire life mastering, and for many Ama who continue well past when they could have stopped, something they genuinely still choose. The next time you think about what counts as impressive in a country known for cutting-edge technology, it's worth remembering that some of the most remarkable feats happening in Japan right now have nothing to do with robots or bullet trains at all. They're happening quietly, underwater, on held breath alone, exactly the way they have for roughly 2,000 years, for however many mornings this tradition has left.